Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Games, an extension of the Mythic Mind Fellowship, which pursues wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Welcome back as we continue with our Final Fantasy series, now finally actually getting into some specific titles, beginning with 1 through 3, which I've linked together here just because they're a little bit light on story. Now, I mean, I will say that they advanced that with each of these titles. You know, two is a significant step forward in storytelling versus one. But even still, in these first titles, we're dealing with a lot of the same kinds of things happening. You know, got to go fix the crystals, realign the world. Like it's a lot of similar sort of stuff here. So I figured it makes sense to tie all these together. Now, as we usually do, I think it'd be worth just hearing thing about your experience with any one or all of these games, or general thoughts, kind of wherever you want to go first. I know that I just recently, started playing through the Pixel Remasters, as mentioned. Right now, I've just started on six, so I've been moving through them, and I know Micah's been doing this as well, right? Going through these early titles. So maybe you can fill me in on some of the plot because I went through them so quickly and they all blend together that I can't separate one crystal from another. But I really did have been enjoying this experience. I mean, obviously these are very simple games. They're very different kinds of games than you get versus like modern RPGs, modern Final Fantasy, in that. Obviously you have to rely on the story. You're relying on the text. Although I will say that I think there's a certain charm to the pixels. I don't know if it's just nostalgia or something else, but I think there's a certain charm to them. And I've really been enjoying seeing, especially how they develop from one title to the next, where they'll in one title they'll really emphasize the story, in the next title they'll really emphasize some kind of gameplay mechanic, and so you can see that regarding with gameplay as well as storytelling, they really are developing with each title, to the point where you get to six, which we'll talk about, a few days or a few weeks down the road here. And by that point, I think they've really discovered themselves. But you can see that early process moving title by title, which I've really been enjoying. But I'd love to hear about your experience. David, why don't you kick us off here?
I don't have a whole lot to say here that I didn't say last week because I own Final Fantasy 2 and 3 on the Famicom, and I think on the PSP, at least Final Fantasy 2. And I think I've got 2 as well on the original PlayStation, but I have never played 2 or 3. But Final Fantasy 1, I bought when it came out on the NES when I was a teenager. I guess that was probably about 15, 1990. Um, and I really enjoyed it. But like you said, it's a very simplistic, sort of a straightforward story, without a lot of character development. I mean, but you find like a rat tail and you turn into an adult, but that's the only like growth. It's like literal growth. The sprites change, but yeah, I love them. And like you said, it's the beginning of something that went much farther.
Cool. Um, Micah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with these games?
Yeah, yeah, I think I described it in piecemeal a little bit last time around, but yeah, I started late and later in the series. Like I played like six first, I think, and then which is like one of the best ones. But then I backtracked. I played Final Fantasy One, the Game Boy Advance version originally, which is a bit different. They changed a lot of things from the original, I know. Particularly how MP is handled sticks out to me because the traditional Final Fantasy One setup is you have like charges for each tier of your magic. So like you've got a level one, level two, level three, and they each have separate charge counts. But in the GBA remake, they went with the system that they used in later games, where it's just straight MP for everything. And the Pixel Remaster, they went back to the charges. So um, that's just a mechanical thing, but I think I always preferred the MP system myself. Um, so yeah, I remember thinking this is way more addictive than it has any right to be because I was coming from much more complex games. I thought, okay, this is going to be too simple. And like I said, the story is very simple. I wasn't particularly engaged in that, but it's like it just has a very addictive gameplay loop and it moves super fast. Like you don't realize like when you've been used to playing more recent JRPGs how fast older games moved. It's just like you got a couple of hours and then you're at the next major fiend boss. It's like very little gap in between. And I remember starting that version of Final Fantasy II, the GBA version, because they were on the same cartridge, one and two, and I bounced off of it very quick because of the job, or not the job, the stat leveling system, which is a really weird system in that game. And I have not yet been willing to go back to that. I watched a story recap for the purposes of this talk, but I'm not actually played through two. Three, I just played through for the first time, literally last week. I took a break from playing Silksong to play Final Fantasy 3 to kind of see what it was like, and I was, again, much like with one, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it for how simple it was. That was the first game where they really delved into the job system, which was later developed further in Final Fantasy 5, which is 5 is also excellent, by the way. I played that several years ago as well. And yeah, and like you said, the story is pretty simple in three as well. Two is the only one that I feel like was really trying with story, but three still does some interesting things. Like I think three has one of my favorite overworlds that I've seen in any RPG, like even a game for a game that old, because it plays with multiple maps where the map you start on, surprise, is a floating island, which is completely separate from the rest of the world. And like you go outside and it's like this tiny little dot in this massive ocean, and then more stuff happens there. At some point, you go get a submarine and go underwater. They were really playing with making that world feel really interesting and expansive. And that was probably my favorite thing about it, which was a surprise. But yeah, really interesting games.
Yeah, that is a good point. And going back and playing them now, perhaps it's easy to miss how complicated some of these things were for the time. Like you said with FF3, how you have a world map inside a world map, or at least two totally connected worlds, and that's something that they continue to play with as you move forward about having sort of different worlds laying on top of each other. So that's just again one of those things where you see them playing with ideas, playing with the technology, and continuing to tweak it a little bit and to really maximize what they have available. Well, let's see. So going to story, I mean, going back to the first one. Um, so the story, correct me if I'm missing any of this. Not that there's a whole lot to miss, but basically, the world's out of sorts because the crystals that symbolize or I guess represent or embody the primordial elements, right? That they've been corrupted, and so the earth is rotting, the waters are not behaving like they're supposed to, like the wind stopping, and so everything's not really acting like it's supposed to, and so you have to go and actually wait before that we get Garland, right? What comes first here?
Yeah,
I'm losing it.
Garland was so like the prologue is we've got to go save the princess,
Right.
and then you go find her in these old ruins captured by this evil Dark Lord named Garland, and you beat him as the first boss, and you take the princess back. And oh, we've just done our fantasy trope of save the princess, and that's the end of the prologue. Now there's the whole rest of the game, which is about the crystals.
Right. Which is, I mean, that is kind of interesting what they do plot wise, in that the what seems to be the just initial prologue quest, becomes pretty fundamental. That once you go off and do the things and balancing the crystals and getting rid of these fiends that are corrupting them, that then you discover like the real source of corruption, which surprises Garland, right? And so you go back to the Chaos Temple where you initially defeated Garland, and you find out he wasn't really defeated. That the fiends essentially like that their power sent him back in time to protect him. And so he gets sent back 2,000 years into the past, and then from there he takes these creatures that would at least become the fiends, and he sends them 2,000 years into the future, so that way they can send him back. And so now he's in this time loop as a way of achieving immortality, which brings us back to this trope that kind of spills into some of the Star Wars stuff we've been discussing on the other podcast about the villains trying to grasp at immortality through artificial means. And so he kind of gains that through this time loop. And then after you strike him down again in the past, he becomes unveiled as there's this demon chaos, right? Which again gets to this idea that we've been talking about, that we talked about last time, about how sometimes they'll throw in like the demonic leaning villain that then gives way to the outright demonic at the very end. And so we see that Garland has sort of merged himself with this demon of chaos. And so where you initially recognize that, like, in your quest to fix the crystals, like you're trying to bring order to the chaos, but now you recognize that like chaos as such is the true enemy, which I think that's it's interesting. Maybe there's something to deal with there. Um, but I mean, based off that plot summary, I mean, what I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I remember like when I was thinking through like overarching themes across the series, like what we talked about last time, there's this notion of like because like chaos has created this time loop thing that there's a notion of cyclical evil and you have to break it somehow there at the end. I do think it is one of the first, it is probably the first instance of Final Fantasy being unnecessarily convoluted because it's not at all clear how Garland became chaos and created this time loop. It's like, oh, somehow this happened. Like the story was super simple up to this point, and it's like super complicated to understand what's going on all of a sudden. But yeah, like speaking when you mentioned the name being chaos, it makes me think of how I've heard it said like one of the classical epic themes is this idea of civilization versus barbarism, which you could also characterize as order versus chaos in a way, just not necessarily on a civilizational level. So you could argue they're playing on that notion, but it is a fairly simple primal concept in the theme.
Yeah, and we have the four classical elements that show up so often in video games. I mean, it's just a good way to differentiate different areas, but also it just works for this kind of a plot to have these crystals representing the four different elements, and then you have to deal with the chaos at the end.
Yeah, and that idea of the elements being in harmony and held together with an overarching order. I mean, you can find that go back to the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers when they're
Hmm.
trying to say, like, what is the fundamental stuff of the cosmos? And something you got Thales saying it's water. Someone else says it's fire, it's ether, it's whatever. But ultimately, where they ended up moving was the primordial stuff is well something like order. It's even Heraclitus says it's the logos, the word, and that you have more fundamental than any of the elements is the reason that holds all of the elements together and allows them to as they move, as one ebbs and flows, that ultimately they're operating in a way that's in tune with order, that's harmonious. And so the most fundamental thing is order, which that directly feeds into this game where the primary enemy is chaos. And I think it's interesting that what we don't see is that the cycle, the apparent fatalism, like that's not final. Which we talked about last time. That relates to the Mass Effect conversations that we had. That it is possible to break out of this and have something like order that stands above and beyond, and after the destruction of chaos. And so being is good. Like order is fundamentally good, and it's actually achievable. And I think that is, I mean, I think it's a very Christian kind of idea. I don't know exactly how that, relates to Japanese philosophy and religion. But my understanding, I don't know if either of you can correct me on this, is that, that their kind of meta narrative doesn't tend to be quite as linear as the Christian understanding. I don't know if either of you can comment on that, but that's at least my general understanding. And so I find it very interesting when we get this theme of the fact that you can break the cycles and have something like goodness win out. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know of if they have the concept of breaking the cycles. I know, it's kind of a mix of Shintoism and Buddhism. That Japanese always joke like that we're Shinto at birth and we're Buddhist at death because they have Shinto rituals for their young children, and then they have Buddhist funerals. It's just more tradition than things that they actually follow and adhere to for the most part. But there is that idea of reincarnation and repeating cycles, for sure.
Yeah, I know, and I assume a lot of this is Shintoism. I know that they have a notion of being in harmony with nature,
Hmm.
which you could argue that's kind of the order, the crystals, like they represent these primary forms of matter in classical sense, fire, earth, air, water. Keeping them in harmony and avoiding chaos could be tied to that. Though I don't know how much Final Fantasy specifically is drawing on Japanese philosophy, because it is apparent, at least to me, that they had some awareness of Western um, fantasy tropes when they were making it. Like, it's got a lot of D&D influence to begin with, which started in the West. I know the soundtrack by Nobuo Uematsu. I know he was influenced a lot by Western styles of music, and that. So I don't, like I said, I don't know how Japanese the story is in origin.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I mean, especially when you get to two, I mean, it's the you strike down the emperor, and maybe we can start at the beginning of that plot. But just to this particular point, you kill the emperor, and then he like comes back basically as Satan, and then you have to enter into Pandemonium, drawing from Paradise Lost. Which, and I mean, that's been used in several different video games and stories. This idea of Pandemonium as this city in hell that has some great conflict at place. And so obviously we're not just pulling on Japanese or even Eastern ideas, but that there's very intentional engagement with the West. That's definitely true. Um, well, so how would you say, um, well, David, what would you say was the appeal of Final Fantasy One in your initial playthrough?
Yeah, uh I love, and I've said this in several other of these, I believe, but I just the scale of the world and the sense of exploration has always fascinated me in games. The bigger the world and the less direction I have, I think the more fun I have. It's one of the reasons that I really enjoyed like Breath of the Wild, Zelda Breath of the Wild, because of it kind of rekindled that I'm just going to walk in a direction and then I'm going to do what I run into. Now, Final Fantasy does pretty much lead you along a path. You hit, roadblocks. You've got to get a boat before you can get from here to here. You got to get the airship so you can get here. But it still feels like this big world, and you're free to go wherever you want. And yeah, that was a big part of the appeal to me.
Yeah, I also really love any game where you can explore. Like to me, that's a lot of the appeal of video games is I think they can capture that much better than just about any other form of entertainment. Um, and yeah, that's one reason I was saying, like I said, why I liked Final Fantasy 3 so much is because the world feels big and it you kind of stumble on where to go, just kind of meandering around, especially once you get into the larger world map. And that's kind of cool. It's like I just happened to fly over this one city and they shot me down. Oh dear, now what? But like you just stumble across that. It doesn't send you there.
Hmm.
And also, that's another thing I think video games do well is they can give you partly because you spend so much time with them, and because you are actually actively interacting, is it builds a kind of an automatic connection between you and whatever's going on. So, like even a very simple story can feel much more engaging because you are literally engaging with it in a way you don't with other media, which is more passively consumed, which is something
That
I've always found fascinating.
that is true. The time investment can make up for a lack of detailed plot at some point because you've still been you're still invested. It's like the end of a long-running TV series or something when you get to the end of a JRPG.
Yeah, I recently, as mentioned in the Discord, I picked up the novelization of 1 through 3. I've only read the first one so far, and I can tell you it's not great literature. Like, if I was just picking this up just to read it independently of this, I would not have made it very far before just putting it down. Not that it's terrible, but it's just, I mean, not great source material to work with. I was kind of hoping that he would maybe flesh out more of the story because it's literature versus a game and a lot of the just gameplay they get to cut out. But surprisingly, it's actually even more simple. So I don't really know what to do with that. It is interesting just to see kind of how he goes about it. Like he does give each of the characters names and some kind of personalities. I mean, it's a pretty superficial and trite. You've got your kind of stoic warrior. You've got your snide, sarcastic thief. Like it's all super tropey, but it's interesting. Don't necessarily recommend it unless you just are really into Final Fantasy. But
Where was the story of how that novelization came into being? Was that written by a Western writer? Like, when did it happen?
no, so it came out in let's see, what's the cover? I feel like it was like I want to say early to um maybe 2006 or that date
Oh,
comes to
okay.
mind.
Okay, so well after the game's released.
Yeah.
Yes. So it looks like it 25th anniversary. So I guess it's the 25th anniversary of I don't know if it's FF1 maybe. Yeah. So relatively recently, all things considered. Yeah. And so I don't know if it maybe coincided with some of the re-releases and reformats into other editions, and so maybe that's what brought it about. So it's interesting, but not great literature.
Yeah, it reminds me of like video game novelizations are kind of an interesting area to me. I've never read a good one. There's not that many. But I remember when I was a kid, there were, I think it's like called like Worlds of Power. There was a series of novelizations of just a few random NES games. And I
Right.
read the one for Mega Man 2. And yeah, it was not complex at all. Like, how much story can you put into Mega Man 2, right? And it was kind of like when you describe Mega Man going through the levels, it's not super engaging literature. It's like he shot this enemy, then he jumped over a bit. Like,
Yeah.
Final Fantasy gives you more to work with, though. So that one's interesting.
Yeah. And the Mass Effect games, of course, they had some spin-off and like prequel novels that were written by the head writer of the game. So I think those probably work a little bit better. Although I only read one of those, the one about how Anderson almost became a Spectre when he was younger. But yeah, I don't think trying to make a book version of a video game is a way to get kids to read more books.
Yeah, it's something that like I'm inclined to read these kind of books only because we're doing this, and that's just, I mean, doing my PhD just taught me that if you're doing something, then read everything you can about it. So that's where I'm going into this. But as far as just the literary value or the way you're going to spend your time, like I don't see a lot of purpose in that because I mean, if you're going to pick up a video game book, like you can pick up Lord of the Rings or like an actual book and use that time much more wisely.
Right. Read where the ideas for the games came from instead of
Exactly.
trying to make a book out of the game. Yeah. Well, I know about 3 years ago there was a game, Stranger of Paradise, which was like the subtitle Final Fantasy Origin, and it was supposed to be kind of a dark fantasy retelling of the original Final Fantasy, and I never played it. I heard it's actually not bad. I mean, the story is really tropey and cheesy apparently, but that the gameplay and the world is interesting. But mostly people at the time were just making fun of how it seemed that all the main character said was, "I must kill chaos" through the entire game. But at some point, I might want to pick that up in the spirit of trying to consume everything I can to understand a concept of a game.
Yeah, I think that was developed by Team Ninja, right? The guys who make the Ninja Gaiden games.
Right, right.
It reminds me of when they made a Metroid game, Other M, which everybody hated the story in that game so much. I
It was
remember.
very, very odd. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm such a Metroid fan. I was still okay with it, but
I was actually the same. I still 100%ed it because that's like one of my favorite series. But anyway, we're talking about Final Fantasy. Metroid might be an interesting one for a future talk.
for sure.
Well, I mean, I suppose moving the focus a little bit to the second game. So in this one, it is definitely a step up in storytelling. And maybe Mike, you can fill in any gaps that I have here in my memory. But basically, it starts off with these orphans who are part of a besieged community by the evil empire, right? So we get the evil empire trope. And this emperor, we're told right at the beginning of the prologue, he's like summoning forces of hell or something. And so there's some demonic connection in this emperor and this empire by extension. So they get knocked down by the imperial forces, and they are brought back and recover or revived by the good guys, the resistance. And basically the story is just about you opposing the empire in different ways. You know, you have to like blow up their lead airship. You eventually strike down the emperor. And as I said later on, or after you kill the emperor, this Dark Knight that has been a kind of secondary antagonist, he takes over and continues the imperial march. Eventually you find out that this Dark Knight, now Emperor, is the brother of one of your companions. And so there's kind of a Vader-esque situation going on there, which is something that Final Fantasy will use again, as we'll see in the coming conversations. But then, as you face down this Dark Knight, then suddenly the emperor who you had previously killed now returns like as Satan or something, and then you have to follow him into hell in order to defeat him for real. And that's basically the story. Is there anything I missed, Micah?
I mean, all I've got to go on is a YouTube recap that I watched the other day, so it's hard for me to say. I do remember thinking, wait, he comes back, he somehow took over hell. Wait, how? Like, is there anything explained of that, or is it just kind of out of nowhere?
I mean, it's pretty much out of nowhere. I mean, they at least gave you that connection from the very beginning, right? That he's summoning these monsters from hell, from the underworld, and that's where his monsters minions are coming from. And so we already see he has some kind of relationship with the forces of hell, with the demonic. I mean, and so I guess that relationship just runs even deeper than you recognize at first. So there's something going on there, something diabolical from the beginning. But as far as exactly how this transformation takes place, I don't really know. That's not really explained. It's just suddenly he's there. Um, and I mean, it's pretty unnerving because unless you know what's going to happen, like you don't really see it coming. You get ready to fight this Dark Knight, and then suddenly he just like comes out of nowhere and says that he's going to send you to hell. It's like I did not see that coming. It just takes a sudden very dark turn.
There is like no, remind me. I think I remember there was something about like that Dark Knight that you face. There's this whole thing where you're trying to turn him away from evil, right? Like he's trying to take over the Empire in the Emperor's absence, and then like his sister is like in your party or something,
Right.
and she's like, "Don't be evil, come join us" or something. And that's when the Emperor shows up.
Well, he actually so the emperor, if I remember correctly, I might not be, but I believe that it's when you're about to fight the Dark Knight, your companion's brother, when then the emperor shows up and then basically said, "I'm just going to kill all of you," and that's when the Dark Knight says, "Oh wait, I'll side with the good guys at least for a little while." And so then he stands with you, but then eventually he kind of goes off on his own anyways because he's not totally repent, or maybe I think he feels like he can't be accepted back into good society, and that's why eventually he leaves again.
I guess there is an interesting story in there about like what it means to like repent and whether you even whether you can be accepted by those you repent toward, which is a complex question in stories. I know there there is some debate when this theme comes up in a lot of stories. It's like, well, this guy killed a whole bunch of people. Like, we can't just like absolve that and let him back into our fold, right? Like, he has to face some kind of justice. And others are like, no, you need to be able to forgive. So there is definitely a Christian relationship in that theme. But yeah, I don't have a good sense of how well FF2 explores that.
Yeah, it kind of makes it feel like well, he helped us, and he's family, so the good guys just want him to just come back, and everything will be fine. Like that, they don't really deal with that issue. Although it's he, the Dark Knight, that feels this guilt that doesn't allow him to come back into the fold. But they don't really deal with the issue of like, what if he did come back into the fold? Like, what would that practically look like, given what he's done? That he took over this evil empire and did who knows what heinous acts. Yeah, they just really don't deal with that. But it's a question I think worth dealing with.
That's a thing that you see a lot in media where you can tell that a character is going to have a heroic turn because they don't let them do anything truly evil. They're on the bad guy's side, but they're not pulling a Darth Vader and killing children or anything like that. They're just, maybe doing what the evil leader tells them to do. And then that way you don't have such a messy turn and they can be accepted once they become a good guy.
And of course, if they do end up doing heinous acts like Darth Vader, then it becomes much more convenient to just let him have a heroic death because then you don't have to deal with it.
That's
It
right.
would get very messy if Luke was able to actually bring Vader back and see what things went from there. All right, Dad, time to stand trial.
Huh.
Yeah, and
So
so go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, since I've not played this game, do you create your characters in any way or choose any classes for them or anything? Or
No, so not for this one. Pretty much everything, yeah, everything just handed to you. And
okay.
so and so this is where, like I said, they tend to move between emphasizing gameplay mechanics versus emphasizing story. And so even in the first one, you get to pick your classes, your starting classes. You can't change it like with the job systems later, but you at least get to pick what your party is going to be for the entire game. And then in the next one, everything's handed to you, but there's more of a story happening here. And then when we move to the third game, well, now we're going to move back on the story, but we're going to allow you to change jobs throughout. And so there's a lot more gameplay mechanics going on.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do remember thinking after I watched it, it's like, oh, it's almost like two was followed up by four because I can feel some similar elements in how they told the story. Like it's like you have all named party members who kind of I I think they come in and out of your party, right? Like some leave and then others enter, which is very much a four thing. And yeah, rapid fire story, but focusing on the story. And whereas three, although it follows up one with like focus on gameplay, it's also followed up by five, which is like three enhanced in a lot of ways. Um, yeah, so that's an interesting point that they alternate.
Yeah, so it's like two, four, and six are story, one, three, and five are gameplay.
Hmm. So I'm glancing at a synopsis. It says something about the last surviving dragoon and stuff. Is it a dragoon in the sense that Kane isn't four? It's the same sort of a thing or something else?
Yeah, so it's the same sort of thing, and you meet him in the belly of Leviathan. So this is when Leviathan gets introduced, and so even though at this point we're still, I don't think two had summons in the proper form. I can't recall. I don't think it does. I think three might be when that really starts. But don't quote me on that. In any case, you get Bahamut introduced in one. He upgrades your party. In two, you meet with Leviathan when you're sailing in your ship and he swallows you. And there's like a whole community inside Leviathan that's been swallowed. And that's where you meet this last dragoon. And so then you fight your way out of Leviathan's innards. And eventually you make it out with this dragoon who later sacrifices himself to save the party. And so we do get that sacrifice theme introduced in a few different characters, I think in two, although maybe confusing that with three as well. And then that is going to go off the rails when we get to four.
It does feel like Final Fantasy is in love with the heroic sacrifice trope. Because that happens a ton in four. Like that's one of the things it's famous for is you keep losing characters because they keep getting themselves killed. Three definitely has it. I remember that sticking out to me with multiple characters. So, but I don't remember two. But I only have a recap.
It looks like two was also the first to have a character named Sid in it, which is a
Oh yeah, that's
recurring
also an important recurring.
Final Fantasy trope. Yeah.
When
Uh,
did Biggs and Wedge start? I know they're in six, but I
I
can't
don't
remember
even know
before
if
that.
Biggs and Wedge are a localization joke or if they're in the Japanese version as well. I can't recall. I think they're probably in the Japanese.
I think they are
Yeah.
because I think originally they were mistranslated as like Vix and Wedge, and then someone was like, "That's supposed to be a Star Wars reference. It's supposed to be
Right.
Vix and Wedge," and so they translate correctly later on.
Right. Japanese has no V, so it's difficult to tell. They use a B whenever there's supposed to be a V. But yeah, they're in because they're in six and seven for sure. But yeah, my son's name is Sid, and it is partly Final Fantasy related, but I don't spell it a weird
Yeah, I
way.
was about to say, do you spell it with a C or an S?
No, it's spelled the best way, the normal
Gotcha.
way.
So he's destined to grow up and build airships now. It's
Right.
going to be his thing.
Yeah, it is interesting. I wonder how that got started. Um, but yeah, it's kind of cool to see the beginnings of these Final Fantasy tropes that get recycled again and again. The Cid in was it two or or Chocobos, are they in one? I can't remember. Maybe two where they start.
I don't think
Um,
they're in the first one.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so
want to say two is the
I
start.
think two is where they start. You get the Mughals in in is it two or three? I mix them up, but somewhere in
Hmm.
here they get started, and so you see these early tropes developing here. Um, what what is the story of three? I remember you're aligning the crystals again, or you're fixing them, or something. Micah, do you remember?
Yeah, this one is at least fresh in my mind. So two, yes, two gets you on the crystal thing pretty quickly. The story kind of meanders, and I actually don't think it explains itself very well because there were several times where I was like, wait, what's going on here? Like, who's Noah? Like, why is he here? Other than like the biblical reference. It never really clearly explains what was going on with him, other than like he had these disciples. But anyway, yeah. If I were to try to summarize the gist, it's like you start out, you realize like that you need to go find the crystals. They're imbalanced, and there's these people who talk about like some past legend of like these four dark heroes, and there's these four light heroes that are thinking you're that, and you're going to bring balance between light and dark, as well as bring alignment to the crystals. And then you have like adventures with each random crystal. And then at some point you get off like your starting island, like I mentioned, and then you see the whole world's flooded for some reason. And there's like it would be fascinating on the original NES version because I was playing the Pixel Remaster, but I think on the original or Famicom version, it wasn't on the NES. I think the original Famicom version, you didn't have a world map, so you would have just been wandering around the ocean for forever trying to figure out where to go. And then you find like these two tiny little islands, and you find like this girl in one of them who takes you to the water crystal, and you fix that, and then the whole world like raises up out of the ocean all of a sudden, and there's entire civilizations there who I guess were like turned into stone or something, so they lasted that entire time while they were underwater, and now they just restarted life again as if nothing ever happened. Um, and then you like save a king who's like being brainwashed by an evil wizard, and work your way up successive tiers of airships. And then you end up going and meeting these three disciples of this ancient Noah guy. Um, and two of them are trying to figure out how to deal with the third one who's gone bad and has been deceived by the forces of darkness. And you end up working with them. They heroically sacrifice themselves as one does in a Final Fantasy game. And then you go and face Zand, the said disciple who went bad. And as you defeat him, you learn that he's being controlled by this ambiguous force of darkness that's coming from the world of darkness. And then all your friends who you met along the way, like they help you out in your time of need when you're about to collapse, and they're like, "Go fight, face darkness." And then you go into the world of darkness and you face you deal with like these four dark crystals which are there for some reason, and free heroes who are trapped in them who come and help you, and you fight. The Cloud of Darkness is the final boss, which just shoots you with particle beams, and you hope you have enough HP to survive it all and the right jobs. And then you beat it, and it says, and it talks about like that there's this cycle. Again, there's cycles to where there's this cycle like every like 1,000 years or so, darkness rises again, and heroes of light are supposed to rise up and challenge it, and you were the ones for that era. And so there's a implication that sometime in the future, heroes would need to rise again for that. So that's the gist as I understood it.
Yeah, it is kind of funny in some of these epilogues when they come out and say, now you go and put the world into order. And so there's like this charge for you in real life to go and do these heroic things in this world, which I mean it's kind of cheesy, but I appreciate it. It's I mean more or less what we're talking about here. Um, and yeah, another trope that comes up sometimes in the series that begins in three is this idea of the ancients. Desh, I think the guy that you meet up in Bahamut's Nest who has amnesia.
Yeah. Yeah, Desh,
Yeah,
I think, was the most interesting of the side characters in that game, even though he's only with you for like a few minutes and then again at the very end.
and uh, they do this a few times in these first titles where at the end your heroes are in grave danger and then all these people from your past somehow come to your aid. Right, is this the one where it's like you get like paralyzed or something, or like cursed at the very end?
Yeah,
Name
there's like a couple of things that happen. Like first you're like surrounded by dragons,
right.
like right before Zand, and then your friends all come to your aid all of a sudden they get like teleported in somehow. And they fight the dragons while you go fight Zand. And then you beat Zand, and then Cloud of Darkness obliterates you, and then your friends kind of pick you up so you can go fight darkness.
Right. And I don't fully understand. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but the kind of philosophy you get at the end of the light and the darkness, it's like, you have to go into the dark world, which, when we hear dark world, I mean, I think this is gonna be like an evil place, but it's not. It's just like a mirrored reality, I suppose. And so you go into the dark world and you free the warriors of dark. You're the warriors of light, and it's like you redeem the warriors of dark that are there, and in so doing, rebalance the dark crystals or something, and so then the dark warriors kind of join with the warriors of light in order to stop this ultimate threat, which I don't really know exactly what to make of all that, but there seems to be something going on.
I do remember thinking it felt very dualistic, kind
Yeah.
of like I think C.S. Lewis talks about that in Mere Christianity. It's like dualism is like it feels like kind of one of the manliest philosophies, even though it's not really correct. It's like thinking like light and dark are like equivalent forces, and you need to be careful not to let one get the upper hand, I guess, is the what Final Fantasy 3 is running with.
And I guess what I don't understand is like what exactly are light and dark? 'Cause it's not the same thing as good and evil. Because like the warriors of like the warriors of dark, that like they help you, right? Like that rightly aligned, they're good guys, just like the warriors of light are good guys. And so this light and dark that we're getting is not good and evil. It seems to be just like, I don't know, something else. I don't quite know what to make of that. It's like it's just another dimension.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like there's definitely evil stuff coming out of it because, like, they're deceiving people in your world to try to get their way. And they're definitely your enemies. But you're right, the heroes who pop up, like, what did it explain? Because I feel like this was another thing that was unclear. The guys you rescue out of the crystals, are those the heroes of darkness?
That was my understanding.
That would track. That would make sense. I think I just didn't get that when I played it.
Yeah, and like somehow they were corrupted, and so in fighting them, you break the curse, and they are heroes again.
Mhm. That makes sense.
It's looking like place names are like and Canaan and stuff in the game
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
I remember laughing when I came to a city called Canaan. I was like, this
Right,
is a
right.
little on the nose, guys. That's before you find out about Noah, who I don't think you ever actually meet.
Yeah,
Well, this one
obviously a very
sounds
biblical story.
right.
Yeah. That
Huh.
is another thing that I feel like is very common in JRPGs where they will, Final Fantasy especially, where they like to take like terms and concepts from various world religions, but completely devoid of whatever their root meaning was, where
Right.
they're just using it for random flavor.
Right. Sephiroth and Genova and all of these things that are
Mhm.
very close to Jewish and Hebrew terminology.
They did at least get Noah associated with the flood, so there's that.
Well, I like what y'all are describing. I can imagine that at the time, uh, repeatedly being introduced to a completely different world map would have been pretty mind-blowing. In the what year did this come out? Probably the late 80s, right? 90. Okay, this came out. So they got this in Japan at the same time we were just getting the first one. Um, but yeah, I love that when a game lets me think I'm nearing the end and then it just opens up much more. I love jumping ahead, but like in seven, I remember when you first get out of Midgar, I'm like, I've already played this game like 8 hours and I just left the first town and got to the world map. Like that was mind blowing to me.
And then you play Final Fantasy VII Remake and you play for 40 hours and you finish an entire literal game. And it's like, oh, now we get out of Midgard. There's so much more. Now we get a
Yep.
sequel.
Hmm.
But yeah, speaking of like when the game came out, like I feel like I might be wrong on this, but in my head, like Final Fantasy 3 might be like the least played of all the Final Fantasies in the West because we got it so late. Like we at least got two with the GBA re-releases. But then 3, I think the first time we got it was the Nintendo DS version, and then now the Pixel Remaster, which is the closest we've got to the original.
Is the DS, is that really supposed to be the same story? Is it like the Warriors of Light or something? Well,
No, Worries of Light is a different game, which does actually follow a lot of the systems that are introduced in 3, but that is a different game. There is an actual Final Fantasy 3 on the DS, which
okay.
I think you can also get on Steam now. But it's like a full 3D remake, albeit Nintendo DS 3D. And they do expand a lot on the story, I know. Like the main characters, I think, are actually named and have actual plot associated with them. But I have not played that one. I didn't look up much on it, so I couldn't say how much they change.
Hmm.
But anyway, but like my point was like it being taking so long to get over here. It's like in the West we just don't have nostalgia for 2 and 3 and a little more for 5 because we got it at least in the GBA era. But I sometimes wonder like how different like our view on this series would be if we had gotten those over here when they came out and could have played them back when they would have been more revelatory for us versus much much later when we've already experienced so much other stuff after the series had developed. I'm sure these games would have had a lot more impact on some people as kids if we'd actually grown up with them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's true. That basically the only time people are going back and playing them now is for the completionist run, or yeah, and you know, two gets a lot of hate because of the leveling system that they played with and unfortunately abandoned, moving forward. But you know, I actually didn't mind it too much. I mean, it's not entirely different than a number of modern RPGs. I mean, like, you know, Elder Scrolls or whatever, where if you want to advance a skill, you use that skill. You know, it's not typically how Final Fantasy works, obviously, and maybe that's why a lot of people don't like it because of what they're used to. But I actually didn't find it. I mean, it kind of made sense this way. So yeah, I don't think that was a major issue. Yeah. Well, I mean, is there anything else to discuss about these first three games?
I do notice that uh, Mithril seems to come up all the time, even in these games. And that's is that a Tolkien invention?
I think so. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Okay, I assumed so. It's just funny what um, Tolkien-esque things seem to just kind of get stolen. It's like, well, it's been around so long, it's just part of when you make fantasy stuff, you just got to use Tolkien stuff, and nobody gets mad and or litigates or anything like that.
Yeah, he did codify a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
which I'm assuming Dungeons and Dragons drew a lot from Tolkien, and then I don't know much about the history of Dungeons and Dragons, but then obviously Final Fantasy drew from it. That might have been like a couple of layers removed because I don't know when Japan got Dungeons and Dragons, and then there was Dragon Quest, and I want to say there was like something earlier, like Hide Light or something. But yeah, so like all these tropes kind of percolated through and became part of the standard thing because they've also got dwarves and I think elves. I don't remember if elves are much of a Final Fantasy thing or
Yeah,
not, but dwarves
they
definitely
are
are.
they are in a Final Fantasy one, right? You go to Elfheim, which is a city of
Yeah, that's right.
elves. And I just confirm, yeah, Mithril is Tolkien. It comes from a couple Sindarin words put together, and so that's just directly Tolkien.
Okay.
Um, I guess he didn't copyright that.
Right.
So, so yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of Tolkien-esque elements to this. I mean, yeah, back in the first game, you get Elfheim, you get the dwarves in some of these early games that are, you know, these bearded miners, and you've got, you know, in the first game, you've got these people. I think it was the town where you don't understand their language until you get the Rosetta Stone. I don't remember what they're called. But you know they talk about how you know they're descendants of this long lost kingdom in the sky, and so you've got this like you know remnants of a former glory. You know a lot of these very Tolkienian tropes that are brought in here, both as far as direct elements as well as just general themes.
Do we know when like sky stuff like airships and floating islands got so to be like a fantasy trope? Because that wasn't a Tolkien thing, as far as I can
Correct.
recall. Certainly not in Lord of the Rings.
No, it's very much a Final Fantasy thing, though. That is it. Like there always has to be some type of an airship, such as it is in some of the games. I guess there's not. Well, yeah, I can't think of one that doesn't have it. Sometimes it's a little shoehorned in late game, like 15. I think spoilers. You can just after the game's done, your car can just fly, I think, is what happens in 15. But um, your base is in an airship that belonged to the ancients that nobody knows who they were in 16. Um, and there are some, oh, maybe there's not an actual airship. There are dragons, though. I can't remember. It was a weird game.
Yeah, this reminds me in three is it's kind of toying with fantasy tropes and the own series tropes at the very beginning. Like you get an airship in the first few minutes of the game, and then you blow it up because you have to crash it into a rock for some reason because you can't fly over the mountains in your airship. I guess it has an altitude limit in that game. Uh, yeah, and I find like floating islands. I'm a sucker for floating islands. I don't know why. Like Zeal in Chrono Trigger is like my favorite part of the game because you're on this cool floating continent. And when you learn like Final Fantasy 3, like the first several hours you spend on a floating continent was like, that's super cool. And then you find out like that was like some like there's actual story meaning behind it because like the whole world's flooded, right? And it was some continent that someone raised up in the sky to kind of preserve humanity. So you've just been in this kind of little enclave the whole time. Um,
That's
but
kind of the
yeah,
plot of Ys as well, which is one of my favorite series.
oh,
It's YS. Some people say Wise, but it's
it's
pronounced
ease. Yeah,
Ys. Ys, yeah. That is a kingdom floating in the sky. The whole series is called Ys, but the kingdom is only in like two of the games.
yeah. I
But
still need to go back and play those first ones. I started the series relatively recently. I played Ease 8, which is amazing.
a great entry point there. I
Yeah,
know we're off on a tangent, but yeah.
yeah, that's true. That was kind of like an anime lost. But yeah, that's not Final Fantasy.
Well, another trope that kind of continues through, well, just a lot of JRPGs in general, you'll find a Masamune sword, which is, I think Masamune was like a legendary swordsmith in Japanese folklore. So usually one of the best swords in the games that you can get is Masamune. I remember that happens at least in four. It also happens in Chrono Trigger and is actually part of the plot in Chrono Trigger. But
And then they get really ridiculous with it toward the end with your jobs where you can like dual wield Masamune and Excalibur because why not?
the best of both worlds.
Yeah, if you're gonna fight darkness, you need the best swords.
Well, I don't know that I have much else to say about these early games. I mean, is there anything else for either of you?
I've
Fair.
just always loved JRPGs in the way that they, when I was young, captured my imagination. And I love that, Andrew, you've been enjoying these Pixel remasters, and I'm going to go back and play two and three now after this conversation. I think I could probably get them on the Switch, right? I got a big
Yeah,
plane ride coming up, so I might buy
fair.
that version so I can get some time in on them. But yeah, I love the way that they just stimulate your imagination and as a child and a desire for adventure in that way.
Yeah, and for me, like one of the things I said earlier, like it's very surprising to me to go back and play those games and realize they are as fun as they are. Because it doesn't feel like they should be, because you think like video games have developed so much since then. And it's like it's not nostalgia talking. Like three, I had a ton of fun with, even though I'm playing it now in 2025. So yeah, they're super fun to go back to, and there's something to be said for a simple story. It might not be incredibly deep themes, but um, older games, especially because they didn't lay everything out for you super clearly, they do evoke the imagination, like you were saying, David, where your imagination is filling in the gaps, which um this is a little bit of a tangent, but like, when you like read a book, your imagination is filling in the gaps. Like reading a book is an inherently collaborative experience between your imagination and the author, in a way that a movie isn't, because it's giving you so much more visual information. And video games, older ones, are similar in that regard, to where you do have a visual element, but it's a very basic visual element. And so you're imagining a lot more with the dialogue, how it's delivered, the character relationships, the world, and also like talked about exploration and like how much I loved the world map in three. Like there's a lot of environmental storytelling that happens where like the structure of the world is interesting, where you're like, wait, why is this city over here? And like they have like this big empire on this continent. But then it's like little villages over here. Why was it underwater all of a sudden? And what does it mean that it's back up? It like what's going on with this floating continent? Like it's like it doesn't answer all these things super clearly, which makes them more interesting in a way when it's not over explained.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, on one hand, I enjoy a deep, complicated novel. I've also, as Lewis would say, I've become old enough to enjoy fairy tales again, right? I feel like for the same reason, I don't know if as a teenager, if I would have enjoyed these early games as much as I do now as an adult. Like there is something that I find very enjoyable about not being surrounded by story but by experiencing it, seeing it unfold around me, having that more of a casual kind of experience with a simple kind of story, I think that provides a different kind of enchantment than in the more modern games where everything is happening around you, constantly. Just as now, I mean, I enjoy reading, when I read with my kids, I enjoy some of these simple children's fairy tales. Um, Precisely because of their simplicity. And in their simplicity, there's a unique kind of depth. Well, as we wrap this conversation, I meant to ask you guys a question last time, and that's like if somebody's getting into Final Fantasy for the first time, where do you think they should start? What's your recommendation? Um, Micah, what do you think?
Oh man, I feel like that does depend on the taste of the person. A lot of people I think would have a really hard time going back to an older game. Like I started with six, but I started in the when the Super NES was still like the main thing. Like I don't know how easy it would be to go back to that now as like your first, unless you just like that older style. If you do, you like the older top-down 2D graphics, fairly straightforward storytelling. I think Final Fantasy VI is an amazing starting point because, like I think you pointed out in like our Discord, I think, or on Twitter, one of those. Six is where the series really found its footing and how it wanted to deliver its story. Um, if you prefer something more modern, my instinct is Final Fantasy IX. Um, a lot of people call that their favorite in the series. It's not my favorite, but it does, I think, really represent what Final Fantasy is as a series really well. You have a lot of the basic archetypes of characters and tropes. It's a mostly pretty lighthearted story, but it still deals with like forces of evil. Um, it's pretty epic. It has a lot of refined mechanics to it outside of a really annoying chocobo minigame. Ignore that. And great characters. Like I would probably say nine overall. And if you want to be in cultural conversation, play seven because everybody's played seven. But I think nine is a little better as a starting point outside of that.
Well, good thoughts, David.
Yeah, I would want to probably ask him some questions. If I know the person, my recommendation might be different. But yeah, seven, I'm probably biased just because of the being there when seven came out was really something else. Like I jumped up off my sofa at parts of that game. Just I was so happy with its ability to tell such a deep story through the video game medium that no one had really been able to do before. I think 10 is pretty accessible, although it's a strange story. I think a good one for people to start with are ones like 7 or 10 that have a really strong opening, I think, that kind of gets you hooked. But I do agree that 9 is really solid mechanically, and I like their return to the kind of the fantasy roots. But I believe I only played through it once when it first came out, so my memory of that one is not super good.
For what it's worth, I've heard the PC version of nine. If you were to play it, it actually, if you like mods, there are actually some really excellent mods for Final Fantasy IX to make it look a lot better visually. um, that are fairly easy to set up and install, but that's
The
only if you're sort to get to that.
the PC version of 7 also you can replace the simplistic character models with others that people have made as well. My son, I know, has played through it with some of those mods. So yeah, good point.
And also to Final Fantasy VII's credit, playing it now, I played it much like a lot of the other Final Fantasies. I played it very late, like literally the year that Final Fantasy VII Remake came out. And I was also surprised with that one how enjoyable it was even now. It like there are parts where it's a little archaic because you can tell that was when they were first learning how to do 3D Final Fantasy, but it's really well executed. The combat's fun. The story doesn't get too bogged down, even though it gets unnecessarily convoluted, like a lot of the series does at times. The story's still engaging. Characters are great, very memorable. So definitely not a bad option. Also, I personally like Final Fantasy Remake, and I don't think that's a bad game, but it also is not the original. It's a very different game.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's included in the upcoming Steam sale. So I'm holding out on. I don't feel like paying full price for it, but I'd like to check it out if it's a good deal. All right. Well, all right. I think those are some good thoughts. I am happy with what we pulled out of these early games. I think it's going to be the individual titles, probably the hardest one to deal with. I think that as we get into episode or not episode 4, that's Star Wars. As we get into Final Fantasy 4, I think we'll have a lot more story elements to deal with. But this is where we'll leave off for now. Until next time, Godspeed. Thank you for listening or watching if you're over on YouTube. If you enjoy these conversations, and I welcome you to support me over at patreon.com/mythicmind. Even $5 a month will provide you with all 3 Mythic Mind podcasts delivered early and ad-free into a single feed. So if you get annoyed by these auto-filled ads, well, that's a good way to skip over that. And so that'll provide you with this podcast, the main Mythic Mind podcast, where we're currently doing a C.S. Lewis series, and Mythic Mind movies and shows, where we're working through a Star Wars series. And also, I encourage you to go ahead and sign up for the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy course, which begins next month in October. So whether you're a patron or not, you can purchase that course individually or become a Tier 3 annual patron, and you'll get everything that's included with patronage, as well as that course and all other courses that begin within that yearly term. So that's patreon.com/mythicmind. Whether you want to become a small-scale monthly subscriber to get involved in this community, or you want the more comprehensive package. But that's it for now. If you're listening on the freebie feeds, make sure you're also subbed to the other 2 podcasts. The next thing to come out from Mythic Mind will probably be an introduction to Till We Have Faces over on Mythic Mind, the main Mythic Mind podcast. And so I will talk to you then. Until then, Godspeed. The Elder Scrolls and Philosophy, a new course beginning in October, led by Dr. Andrew Snyder. I played a lot of video games in my youth, perhaps more than I should have. But as I got older, got married, had kids, and completed a PhD on the Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, I almost entirely stopped playing games. However, there were certain titles that stayed with me during this time, at the very least in my mind. In fact, looking back, I now realize that most games of my youth were not entirely frivolous, but they instead served quasi-literary roles, fueling my imagination, intellectual curiosity, and my appreciation for wonder. Chief among these titles are the mainline games of the Elder Scrolls, and in particular Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. And I know that I am not alone in this, as the wild success of the recent Oblivion remaster would indicate. Now, in addition to teaching university courses in philosophy and religion, I've also started offering independent courses to anyone who wants to come along with me and with the community in pursuit of wisdom through primary and secondary worlds. So far, these independent courses have been literature-based, such as The Fiction and Philosophy of C.S. Lewis, Life, Death, and Meaning with Beowulf and Boethius, The Lord of the Rings, A Brief History of Ideas, and Plato, Stoicism, and Till We Have Faces. However, I've recently been leading the Mythic Mind Fellowship into popular media as well, such as movies and games, and it did not take me many steps in this direction to decide that I wanted to do something with the Elder Scrolls. During this 6-week study of the philosophy of the Elder Scrolls, we're going to go deep into various aspects of Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim to better understand the driving forces of the sub-created world and our movements within it. Among others, we'll be asking questions like, what is the creation mythos of the Elder Scrolls, and how does this relate to primary world ideas? What are the 36 lessons of Vivek, and where do they direct us? What is unique about the hero of Kvatch's particular kind of heroism? What does the Oblivion Crisis reveal about the nature of evil in relation to societal institutions? Why are dragons so prolific in our fantastical imaginations? What unique opportunities for existential exploration are made available in open-world games? Join this community as we enter Tamriel with the purpose of learning more about our place within our own world. Each week will include ongoing Discord conversations, at least 1 or 2 asynchronous videos to watch whenever you want to, and live discussions, which will be recorded and made available if you're not able to participate. You can purchase enrollment in the shop over at patreon.com/mythicmind, or become a Tier 3 annual patron to get access to all courses that begin within your yearly term. This course begins in October, so go ahead and make it happen. And I hope to see you there.